Susie Hess.
And I'm Yehuda Price. This is Our Stories Matter. Romarilyn Ralston is Program Director of Project Rebound at California State University Fullerton, and also serves as the co-chair of the CSU Project Rebound Policy and Advocacy Committee. Project Rebound supports the higher education and successful reintegration of the formerly incarcerated with a vision that higher education disrupts the revolving door practices of mass incarceration. Romarilyn is a Black feminist prison abolitionist scholar working to interrupt criminalization at the intersections of race, gender, and education. After 23 years of incarceration, Romarilyn earned a master's in arts degree in liberal arts at Washington University in St. Louis and a bachelor in arts degree in gender and feminist studies at Pitzer College. So great to be here in this space with you, Romarilyn. You know, we definitely have a history, and to our listeners who don't know Romarilyn and I's history, I had been paroled to a halfway house of sorts. They want to call it a halfway house of sorts. And definitely wasn't a good experience for me. It was it felt like we had correctional officers there. It felt like we were just in another form of incarceration with just a little more freedoms. We were worried about any sort of violations or whatnot or getting in trouble. And I heard about Project Rebound while I was inside. And I said, you know what? I looked on the internet real quick. I said, let me call them just to see, you know, what sort of things they have available about getting eventually enrolling there and getting my MSW there at some point. And so I just called just for information, just to make sure, you know, I'm not missing anything. And I didn't intend to have anything to do with Project Rebound. And Romarilyn answered and said, hey, so what's your living situation like? And to me, right, even that simple question for somebody that's in a halfway house to understand that a living situation, the circumstances one finds himself living in, is so important, and almost what somebody's like almost, I don't want to say solely focused on, but it's a key part of their reentry plan. And if you don't know where you're going to live, it could create a sense of anxiety, a sense of, you know, disorientation, and just having that sort of situation at least alleviated or addressed could just open up the door so many other possibilities. And she kind of just homed in onto that, to something I didn't even necessarily realize. And that's the key. I think when people are getting released from prison, they don't even know the certain questions to ask or what is always important, because, you know, for a lot of people to be rehabilitated, some people haven't been habilitated, learning how to live productively in society. And she told me about, we have the first housing program in the nation for people who are formerly incarcerated for college. Come on down. Let me meet you. Let me see what, let me hear your story. Let me see what your needs are. And next thing I know, I'm able to move into the John Irwin housing program they have at Cal State Fullerton, $1 million home in a $1 million neighborhood. And there's so many other supports, not just the housing, right? They offer so many other supports. And I don't want to, steal her thunder, so to speak. She's going to speak to it more eloquently and with more details than I am. But it was just such a great experience for me. And it really allowed me to excel in my academic career and get to where I'm at now. And I'm forever indebted to that sort of support from Romarilyn. So thank you so much for being here, Romarilyn. I say it over and over again, you know that. You might get a random message from me. When I got my bachelor's, I thanked her. When I got my master's, I thanked her. When I started my doctorate program, I thanked her, because I know, a lot of people in my life might not necessarily know what that key thing did for me. So thank you again, Romarilyn. To everybody that's listening, Romarilyn is that person, so thank you for being here, Romarilyn.
Well, thank you for having me, Yehuda. It's really a pleasure to speak with you always. And, I'm just grateful for being in the position that I'm in to help scholars like you. And I'm also, just like you, very thankful and grateful for those whose shoulders I stand on. When I paroled from prison in 2011 to Claremont, I was sitting next to the beautiful Claremont colleges, and it was people sewing into my life, giving me opportunities to access higher education is why I was able to get into Pitzer College. So from there, the sky was the limit, from Pitzer then to WashU and now back to CSU Fullerton. And I'm able to not just pay it forward, but also be a part of other people's lives who have walked the same path I have, and see, the importance of accessing higher education and its transformative power, not just on the individual, but their families and communities. It's folks like us who have that experience with the criminal legal system now being part of higher ed and post-secondary education. We're able to break a lot of generational poverties and lacks in our lives because of the transformative power of education. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of your life and your family's life. And I'm so proud to see all the things that you're doing, the amazing life that you have. And when you said the John Irwin House was in a $1 million neighborhood and it's $1 million house, first thing came to my mind was every one of you are worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. What we provide you in the sunny hills of Fullerton is but a drop in the bucket of what you deserve.
Thank you, Romarilyn. Thank you for everything. Thank you for sharing that. And kind of just expanding off what you just spoke about, can you answer or can you tell us about why does education matter for community members who have an incarceration experience?
Well, I think education is very powerful. And Nelson Mandela once said that education is the most powerful weapon one can use to change the world. So here's one of our most powerful formerly incarcerated leaders talking about the power and transformative power of higher education, that education is a weapon, that you can use it to change the world. So it goes beyond the individual. It goes beyond the family. It goes beyond the community. It goes beyond even the nation state. It has no borders. It has no confines. So it's that powerful. So I think that education matters because it informs us about everything that we do. And if it wasn't so powerful and transformative, the United States would have never set up all of these barriers to accessing education for certain races and certain genders. So I think that's why education is so important and why it matters, because it has the power and the potential to transform everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for our listeners that may not all be aware of the over 46,000 collateral consequences of folks coming home. I know I've heard you speak, which is why I'm super excited that you're here. Can you talk about some of your other advocacy work for folks who are coming home, who have been inside for quite a while, and because they may not know what happens out here once you come home?
Sure. Thank you, Susie. That's a great question. For a little over 20 years now, I've been involved with the California Coalition for Women Prisoners. It's a statewide organization that advocates for incarcerated women, trans folks, and gender nonconforming people in women's prisons. And through that work, we've been advocating on a number of fronts to help push some, I think, really progressive policy and legislation through the state of California to impact the lives of those who have been formerly incarcerated and who are still incarcerated. Also, with my work with Project Rebound as the co-chair of the CSU Project Rebound Policy and Advocacy Committee, we've been working on a number of education policies to help folks who are inside and folks who have returned to the community have access to education. You spoke about those over 46,000 collateral consequences to someone having a criminal record. There's 70 million people in this country with a criminal record, and education is just one of those spaces that bar us. So we have to look at the policies and the laws across our state to see where we can remove some of those barriers and provide access to better education, to better housing, to better medical care, to support folks who are the most vulnerable and marginalized people in this state. And that's the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, formerly incarcerated folks. All of us, are in this category where many laws and statutes have been set up and they're decades old to prevent folks like us from accessing certain services, resources, classes, places. I mean, it's just a number of things. You would really be surprised how many laws we have on the books that disenfranchise some of the most, hardworking people we have in this state. And if we talk about believing in redemption, believing in second chances, believing in rehabilitation. And so with that word, rehabilitation, we turn to the California Department of Corrections and rehabilitation, which says that it is concerned about the welfare of those incarcerated while they also protect the community. So this public safety piece is great, but what are the people accessing while they're inside of these spaces? And that's the problem. There is no rehabilitation from the state because it's a conflict of interest. Let's just be real about it. You can't want to house people for life and then say that you want them healed so that they can go forth and be, good community members in their neighborhoods. So it's just a conflict of interest. And I didn't want to go down this route when you asked the question about some of the advocacy, but that's what it's like being part of California Coalition for Women Prisoners and also doing policy and advocacy work on behalf of Project Rebound. We run into this contradiction with the state all the time, and it really boils down to money and in investing in people. Are we going to invest in education and in social services and in resources that help build the community, that reduces harm to our community members? Or are we going to continue to invest billions of dollars into the criminal legal system that is really set up to isolate, house, and prevent people from being their best self? So, the advocacy work that we've been doing is in response to the movement's work to defund the criminal legal system, to move money from those who are in business to punish to those who are in business to heal. And that's why I'm on this show today. We want to talk about healing. We want to talk about reducing harms. We know that education is just one way of doing that, and advocacy is another way of doing that.
Thank you. Thank you. You brought a couple different ideas to my mind that I wasn't even going to necessarily ask. With some of your advocacy work, I know it is not just connected to education, as you kind of touched on. I remember hearing something about like getting that $5 copay that people who are incarcerated had to pay to go see see medical, see a doctor or whatnot, had to pay that $5. So I know you did advocacy work connected to that. And there's so many other things besides just the education. I understand the education is a piece of that for sure, because it's transformative. I'm wondering, just as a side note, the conflict of interest, it is intriguing, right? Obviously, we know that they added the R on the rehabilitation piece. It's a good talking point, or so to speak, or it's good public relations. But if the CDCR, if we're speaking about California, obviously, but this is a American problem, and it's not confined to California, but if they're in charge of implementing, a lot of these reforms, are running the operations, and there is that conflict of interest, how do we address that conflict of interest? Is there a way to address that conflict of interest?
That's where policy comes in, because these legislative bills become law. You have to follow the law. Even if you are the biggest jailer in the world, you have to follow the law. So we have to seek legislation in order to make sure that our people inside prisons are being able to access certain things. You mentioned the copays. So eliminating copays was just one thing that we were able to do through legislation, AB 45, which was sponsored by Assembly Member Mark Stone. Now, CDCR also issued a memorandum saying that they would no longer charge the copay, but that was just a memorandum. And if it wasn't legislated, then at any given time, CDCR would have been able to say, well, that was last year. This year, we need to, bring that back, reinstitute that into charging folks who make 8 cents an hour a $5 copay to see a doctor or a dentist. So things have to be done to keep things from going back. And we have a really bad history, not just in this state, but in this country, of trying to maintain the status quo.
Yes. And I did not know about the $5 copay. And then I started thinking, my God, how was anyone able to receive treatment during COVID? I mean, if they didn't have a $5 copay, I mean, how did that even work? And it sounds like, I mean, it passed out here, but then I think about the other 49 states of what's happening and with COVID and the highest numbers. And we know the highest numbers are Black and brown inside.
Yeah, well, luckily for us, we eliminated copays prior to COVID. So individuals inside could just submit their request to a doctor or a dentist and hopefully get seen. But prior to 2019, if you didn't have $5 on your books, then a hold was put on your account until you had that $5, and then that was taken. For a person who makes 8 cents an hour, they have to work 60 hours to make $5.
My God. And, you know, as you were also, then I think about the education piece. How can education even be made up? I know with Yehuda, we've talked about it, like he would give up, you know, certain things to be able to get a book or ask his family to help him in terms of getting books. I mean, how does one get educated when you're inside, when you're taken away from the education system on the outside?
Yeah, well, in this state, CDCR has a literacy mandate of high school GED. So everyone who's incarcerated can get basic education, adult basic education. And they are really, you know, assigned to education programs. If you don't have a high school diploma or a GED when you enter into the prison system here in this state, then you will most likely be assigned to an adult basic education program until you achieve that. Now, college, on the other hand, is voluntary. We know that a GED or a high school diploma is not going to get you the type of employment to support yourself or a family. So college level education inside is voluntary. And we have a number of community colleges across the state because, again, of legislation, the Hancock bill that allowed the community college system to provide education programs inside our prison system, which was, you know, a long time coming after the Crime Bill of 94, which eliminated Pell Grant access to incarcerated people. So it was from 1994 to I believe 2014, the Hancock Bill, where incarcerated people didn't have access to quality education that was free. They had to pay for these types of correspondence programs that were a lot of diploma mill type of schools that were just taking advantage of folks inside because community colleges were not providing education unless they were able to get some funding for it. And the 94 Crime Bill removed that funding. And the Hancock Bill here in this state created an avenue for community colleges to be funded and provide education to incarcerated people. Now, through legislation, we're working on SB 416 to make sure that we have guardrails around educating incarcerated people so that they are not going to be taken advantage of and that they receive quality education from nonprofit, local, or regional institutions that then set them up for a degree pathway to a bachelor's program, to a master's program, so that we have Yehudas all over this state going from bachelor's to master's to PhD programs. That's what SB 416 is trying to do. Make sure that folks aren't being taken advantage of inside and that they have a degree pathway post-release. Project Rebound is just one of those statewide programs that are providing access to on-campus programs.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing what advocacy could do to the most marginalized population. Because I remember being incarcerated and just figuring out, how am I going to pay for books? Or trying to get, family members, instead of getting me a package or a canteen, can you think you can piece up and buy this particular class? Because I was able to get an AA, but I know, especially of how long I've been incarcerated, that an AA by itself is not really going to do too much for me. And so it takes this sort of advocacy work. And a lot of people, are not as concerned with this marginalized population. And it's a tragedy, because at the end of the day, focusing on the most marginalized of us is a benefit to the community as a whole, because we have to return to the community. That's why I always emphasize, we use this person-centered language, that it's community members with an incarceration experience, right? These are community members. It's not some pariah population that is not part of the community. They are one and same with the community, and how we treat them kind of is how we treat ourselves, or how we want our community to be. And taking that into account, and just knowing that you had your own incarceration experience, and you chose to say, not just to focus on yourself, right? Anybody could just say, hey, I got really, me out of all people, after doing all this amount of time, I need to just focus on me, and try to reestablish myself. But you chose to not just look back, but go back. So, and you spoke a little bit to it. And I want to just know if you can kind of articulate it as, what is your why for doing this work?
Why not?
I like that.
I'm a Black woman, and I stand on the shoulders of Black women. Black women have carried, I think, pretty much the load of this country. I have grandmothers, my mother, they have empowered me to be more than just a person looking out for themselves. I was raised in a community of matriarchs, of women who took care of each other, who inspired each other, and who worked in the church, making sure that everyone ate and everyone had clothes and shoes. So it's just part of my DNA. I think as a Black woman, that's kind of what we do. It's kind of instilled in us. That's why, I believe Black women are the most important beings on this planet. But the why is because I've experienced the power of education, and the power of freedom and liberty, and the power of access, and the power of voice. And so when you know and understand these powers, and you're able to wield them in a way that you can capture other people and say, hey, here's an opportunity for you to build your own power, build your own voice, amplify your community. That's what women really do well. It's a disservice when women say we don't support one another. I spent 23 years in a cage, surrounded by women and gender nonconforming folks and trans people who identify as female. And we built community there. We overcame there. We constructed opportunities for one another. We had organizations that gave back to the community during the LA riots. We collected canned goods and clothing and sent it to Los Angeles. During 9/11, we raised money, made quilts, sent that money and quilts to New York. During the tsunamis, we raised money and sent it to Red Cross. For earthquakes, we've raised money and sent it to Red Cross. So women are the backbone of the world. We bring life into this world. We are builders. Our bodies are builders. So that's what we do naturally. And when you put thousands of us together, there's nothing we can't do. There's nothing we can't do. We can make a house out of a roll of packing tape and cardboard. And I know you know what I mean, because that's what we do inside.
That's a powerful why, as powerful as any why I've ever heard. So, and I appreciate your why for doing this work. I appreciate the work. You said something else that's powerful. It was powerful to me, and it stuck with me after the fact from when you came on and appeared before our Unchained Scholar meeting. You came for USC. And it stuck with me. And we were talking about formerly incarcerated people, this and that. And you described it like, I'm a person with an incarceration experience. And that stuck with me. I'm like, oh, I see what you're doing there. And it really stuck with me. So I'm wondering, what is your advice on how a formerly incarcerated person can grow into an identity that is not defined by one's incarceration experience?
Yeah, that's great, because we're talking a lot about language. And language is changing all the time because we want to center the person first. So we want to use person first language, but it's hard because people identify in certain ways that we think is dehumanizing. But, we come from communities where some terms are considered derogatory, but then in another community, it may be a term of endearment. So, and, I'm talking about the N word, just for example. So, with wanting to give everyone respect in how they use language, when it comes to people who have an incarceration experience, we want to, I think, lead with that. Some people want to say previously incarcerated or justice involvement, or you can spin it a whole bunch of ways. And people are spinning it a whole bunch of ways. But I think that, putting the person first and saying an individual with this experience, because we all have different experiences. There are many things that I haven't experienced in this world that other people become experts on and are able to speak to, whether it's some other type of trauma in their life or is some success that they've had. They become the expert because of that experience. But they are a person before they had that experience. And so that's why I try to incorporate that in a lot of my language when I'm speaking to the public so that they can see us first as people and not as an orange jumpsuit or a person dressed in blues or the one who committed a crime. We are people. And as you said, community members. We return to the community. 95% of all incarcerated people return to the community. We want to return home, whole, healed, with an identity that helps us to build in our communities. But if we're going to come with language that is dehumanizing and all of these 46,000 collateral consequences that impact our lives, it's hard for us to succeed. Be, I think, the people that we were born to be our authentic self, our true self, before really society's harms set us up for some other experience like incarceration.
And even that person-centered language, I don't think it's really familiar to even a lot of people on the inside. I remember when somebody called you inmate, you'd be like, no, I'm a convict, And so you're just embracing this label that was put on you, and even like the worse the label, oh, let me embrace that, and to understand now that no, we are people at the core, and even what we've done does not define who we are, and even our experience doesn't necessarily define who we are. And I look at you, and one of my fears was when I got released from prison that I would become a sort of mascot where, oh, look at this person that did all this time, and oh, this formerly incarcerated person, and that would be my defining identity. But looking at someone like yourself, who, when I look at all you've done, I have to remind myself, oh yeah, and she did 23 years in prison. So I think you've gone a long way to demonstrate how one does it and how one separates an experience from a defining characteristic of who they are or all of who they are. So definitely appreciate that.
Thanks. And there's a lot of us who feel the same way you did. We don't want to be the mascot. And we think sometimes that we're the only ones out here doing what we're doing, but we're not. And we have this conversation oftentimes within Project Rebound, and we say that we're not unicorns. Although we are all individuals and all unique, individuals with different experiences, we're not unicorns. We're not a mascot. There are hundreds of thousands of people. As I said, 70 million people in this country have an incarceration experience, have a record, and they are thriving. And that is just an experience that was in their life years ago. Over 30 years ago, I committed a crime and I was punished for it. Over 30 years ago. Why should that define the rest of my life? It should not. I should have every opportunity to be the best that I can be. That's what supposedly the American dream is about. So either the American dream is real or it's not. Well, we know that it's not because it's set up for only certain people to achieve certain things. So for those of us who are smarter because of education, now we're able to teach our communities, teach our people that here's a way not only for you to transform yourself, but to provide access to all of these things that we were never supposed to have access to.
I so appreciate all of what you're saying. And I think, at USC with the Unchained Scholars, when I started talking with students who were formerly incarcerated before they labeled themselves as Unchained Scholars and they became a movement, when I talked about having lived experience is a strength. You're more attuned as a social worker. And, I even think of myself having lived experience of intimate partner violence. I really would rather talk with someone who's experienced it and not ask the questions of like, why did you keep going back? All that stuff that keeps coming up. And so I appreciate the highlight of language. Language matters. And now Unchained Scholars, the former OG of Unchained Scholars, actually, at the very beginning, she said, first time she came out at USC, we had an event, and she came out like as her person, and she said, it feels really amazing to come out of the convict closet. And she knew, and she still knows, it's a strength. She has passion to change policy. She has passion to help other students and support other students who were formerly incarcerated. So I always remember when she said that. And then I think about a lot of what you were talking about in terms of the American dream, right? And who the American dream is really for and who it was created for. And I wonder what your thoughts are about what does healing from the United States look like?
Now, Susie, that's a setup question there. What does it look like? It looks like whatever it needs to look like for the communities that have been harmed. So if we're looking at our Native American communities, it needs to look a certain way to repair the harm and the damage and the violence that has been done to that community. It's going to look a little different for the African American community, not just reparations, but a lot of other things. It's going to look different for Asian Americans. It's going to look different for, whatever group. So the United States or America, as far as trying to right some wrongs, eventually one day we will get to a place where this country is being run by those who they've tried to keep out for hundreds of years. And we're moving in that direction. That's why there's so much pushback and so much animosity and so much anger against the squad in DC. But, those women of color, those senators are doing work for their communities. We saw Stacey Abrams come out and make a difference, across this country. So I think the United States and what they owe communities that they have harmed, it's going to look different for everyone. And, that includes those who have a number of disabilities and who look different and different identities and not just different shades of color, because, for a Black woman who's a dark-skinned Black woman, I face colorism everywhere I go too. So it's so much to undo. We can't undo it all. That's why we have to abolish and build what we want. That's what abolition is all about. Let's not try to keep undoing all of these things. Let's just say no more and build what we want. Build the society, the community, the family, the neighborhood that we want. Because what we have is never going to work for us because it wasn't built, designed, or created to work for us. We have to do what we have to do in the moment and work within what we have. But abolition is the goal. It's the dream. Reform is reformed is what we can do now. AB 45 with the Dignity and Care Act, eliminating sentencing enhancements, the Racial Justice Act. We can do those things, but still the goal, the big picture is abolition, creating the communities that are going to reduce harms across the board. So we're talking about equity, that there's healthy schools in all of our community, that everyone has an opportunity to go to college if they want to go to college. It should be free. You know, our kids should all have access to art programs and clean parks and clean water and clean air and a safe place to sleep at night. There shouldn't be lead in our water, in our walls. We shouldn't be drinking brown water. Kids shouldn't be policed at schools. I mean, there's just so many things that need to be undone. And that's, what we're working towards as abolitionists is to, as Ruthie Gilmore says, change everything. We have to change everything in order to create the thing that we need.
Wow. Yes, I agree 100%. And thinking the system is doing what it always meant to do, right? It is doing exactly what it should be doing in terms of white supremacy and how it all began. And I think Michelle Alexander said, prison is contemporary slavery. So it's just a different form. I know you have named so many pieces that need to be abolished, reformed. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about what it means to address carceral trauma through education?
Yeah, that's interesting because our work within Project Rebound, and Project Rebound is a consortium of programs that support students with an incarceration experience across the CSU. And the California State University system is the largest public university system in this country. We should be using public dollars to create access and opportunities for marginalized people. So what we are doing to reduce that is creating a space where folks who have been harmed by the carceral state, by the system of mass incarceration, whether they are system impacted with a loved one or a family member or a spouse or a parent incarcerated, where they are in a community of people who understand that trauma, who have lived it and seen it and have been able to unpack it in a way that it's not causing them to create more harm. And so we provide counseling services and we provide, healing circles, and we provide, everything that a community of care should provide. If you need food, we're going to feed you. If you need books, we're going to give you books. If you need transportation, we're going to help you get to where you need to go. Because that's what cultivating a community of care is. And so we know that when folks get out, there's an imposter syndrome that you have. There's stigma that you deal with. There's shame that you deal with. And we are oftentimes traveling around and trying to navigate these huge systems called universities and colleges undercover. And so when your OG from Unchained Scholars said that, I feel like I'm coming out, we are coming out because we've been conditioned to believe that our experiences are so taboo that for the rest of our lives, we will never be able to be anything other than that. And we need to keep our head down and we need to crawl through life begging for mercy and forgiveness until the day that we die. And that's wrong. So Project Rebound is one of those programs that embraces your incarceration experience. And we show you that it is just an experience. It is not who you are. Our crimes are not who we are. Although some are horrible, they are not who we are. They're oftentimes committed as a youth or in some other traumatic experience or tumultuous relationship that you are trapped in, and things happen. So now we need to provide a space where folks can become their best self. And if education is what you want, you should be able to have that. But, the longer you're inside of a cage, the longer you are denied basic needs and basic rights, and that's what incarceration does, the more likely you are going to be institutionalized in some capacity. Even the Yehudas and the Romarylyns that make it out, and are part of reinventing their lives through the transformative power of higher education, there are still things that we do and how we think because of those years in that cage. So we are always unlearning things because stuff comes up for me 10 years later. And I say, oh my gosh, I need to work on that. Oh my gosh, I thought I had worked on that. I need to revisit. And so that trauma, that's what trauma is, and stress. Stress is a non-specific response of the body by demands made upon it. The demand made upon our bodies living in a cage is unbelievable. We have had to dissociate ourselves from ourselves when we are in these places called prisons. And we have to bring ourselves back to ourselves in order for us to go forward. A lot of us are not able to do that because we've been on medication. Now we have mental health issues, and now there's a whole bunch of other traumas in our lives. Those of us who are able to bring the authentic self back with that person who survived those experiences in that cage and still can go forward and be the best that they can be in the community, helping others and making a difference in other people's lives is a gift. And it's a struggle. And the struggle is real. But we're here. And without a podcast like this, without programs like Project Rebound or Underground Scholars or Unchained Scholars or Rising Scholars or a number of other reentry programs in our community, helping to bring us back to ourselves and back to the community, we would all be fragmented and broken people.
Whoa, I have goosebumps just listening to everything that you say. And I'm so happy that our listeners are going to hear you because there's a lot of, I think, of the students at USC who haven't come out yet. And hearing the strength of you, of Yehuda, I think will be incredibly powerful. And what I appreciate everything you've been saying, but one thing in particular is that you not only talk about the symptoms or outcomes of oppression, but you have really focused on how to abolish, redesign, and challenge the system of oppression themselves. And I'm wondering, what action steps can listeners begin to take if they wanted to get involved with Project Rebound or any other advocacy that you're involved with?
Well, there's a thing called Google. If you're inspired by something that was said, on this episode, put that inspiration to work. There needs to be some action behind it. You can go online and you can look at calstate.edu/rebound, and you can choose the Rebound campus that's closest to you to support. There's ways to get involved and volunteer at our program. We're always looking for mentors and tutors, or you don't have the capacity to be a mentor or a tutor to a student. There's ways to donate. You can send a check or click the donate button. If you don't want to do that, then you may know someone who is formerly incarcerated, maybe a neighbor or a friend of a friend. Start looking at them differently. Start encouraging that person, because that's something that we all can do. We can all encourage someone. We can all give someone the benefit of the doubt so that they don't feel like an imposter in their own community or in their church. So where they're not so ashamed that they can't break out of that prison, because sometimes the prison is in the mind too. And when we are released, we have to do some work in our minds because of that institutionalization, because of that trauma that is in our heads. So lift someone up. Don't look at the person that's on the evening news every night sometime as a throwaway person. That is something that they're doing. It's not who they are. Right, wrong, or indifferent, good, bad, or ugly, because we all have the capacity to change. Even the best person can do something wrong. Just like the one who has done wrong all their life can become a good person. These things are fluid because it's behavior. And as a human being, we have the capacity to do good and to do bad. And we know that by providing individuals with basic needs, with love and support so that they have a sense of belongingness, we do better. But when we oppress people, condemn people, deny people, and punish people, you are going to get back what you put in. So what do you want? Do you want a healed and whole community, or do you want a broken community that's full of anger and rage? And this is why we have to abolish certain systems within our society, because it's not good for the world. Punishment is not good for the world. We must think differently.
Yeah, I mean, I essentially agree with, I don't know how many times I could say it over and over, but the way you conceptualize things, the way you articulate things, I think it's going to be very impactful to our listeners, and hopefully give a lot of other people a reimagine the way things can be, and understand that education is political, that so many of the systems that we're trapped in, the only way out is through, like you said, legislation, for advocating, for, being political active, and not just leaving it to somebody else to do it, but become involved, right? Because it affects the community. Definitely appreciate the words you shared with us today, and just being here with your presence. And I'm wondering, because we know how the experience of us experiencing you has been for us, and I'm sure the listeners do as well, but what has it been like for you to tell your story today?
I'm always, humbled by the opportunity to share my experiences, whatever wisdom I may have, or whatever my dream is for reimagining, my world, my community, my spaces. It's just a wonderful opportunity to always speak to people and share knowledge, because knowledge is power. You never know whose life you're going to touch when you're a part of something that goes public, that reaches people that you've never even thought about, that you may never even know. You hear about this stuff all the time, that somebody heard or read about a story in a newspaper, and then they donated millions of dollars, or they gave a house, or because there are millions of people in this state that have more wealth than they need. And it can be shared with others who need it more. But they live in a world where they don't know what the needs of others are. And so participating in this today is a way for me to hopefully reach some of those people and share with them, not just my journey, but the journey of the students that I have the privilege of supporting, and helping us continue to become the people that we were supposed to be all along.
Thank you, Romarilyn. And there is something you spoke about that kind of brought to mind that I don't think a lot of people are understanding. Like, just to get an education, you spoke about education should be free, right? And we should be allowing that, because it allows a lot of people who are coming from these marginalized positions. And I just think of myself, which is, oh yeah, get all these degrees, awesome. But guess what? There's that student loan that comes with that, right? And that's going to weigh on us more so than it may weigh on the average individual, because we're not 20, 21 years old, 22 years old, building up this, going through education, but paying off student debt over time. I look at it now, I'm going to be 70 something years old by the time I get my student debt, manageable, right? So it's not just giving me the access to the education, right? But you're kind of setting this up so I'm not able to leave wealth to the next generation, right? There's no generation. There's going to be that gap, right? And now my kids are not going to necessarily start off with that much of an advantage from me, except that I do have an education to perhaps provide for them, but that wealth is not there, and they're going to be starting from essentially ground level. And that's a lie. And I don't think people understand that. So it's not just about giving us education. It's about giving us affordable education and understanding that these particular systems that are in place, no matter how much education we have, they can still be a hindrance to us. And it actually could dissuade other people who may want to follow us from past. Like, why should I be in that much debt? Right? Why should I? I mean, that's just not the best decision for me. And I'm not going to set my sights that high or that far out. I'm just going to focus on what I could do to get an immediate job and not worry about that. So thank you to speaking about that and speaking in a way so perhaps people can look at all these different aspects of what is needed, and hopefully people can step to the plate and come and try to help address this.
Thank you for saying that. You know, our kids at least will have the social capital that comes with our education. But you're right. You know, the financial stability, the wealth, we're not going to be able to pass on to our families because we are in debt. And I hear it every day from some of our students when they can't pay for their tuition. They drop out. Sometimes we can support, sometimes we can't. And it's heartbreaking because when you're looking at the price of education, you know, it's just ridiculous. You went to a private school, I went to a private school, so I'm taking my debt to the grave, just like you might take your debt to the grave. But folks who are attending public universities, public schools, they should be free. They should be paid for by our tax dollars. You know, it should be free access. If you choose to go to a private school, then maybe there should be some costs. But public education should be free.
And that might even go into the calculation of a person, you know, saying, you know what, instead of private school, maybe I should go to a public school. And maybe that will cause private schools to even lower their costs. There's a cause and effect there.
Yeah.
So I hear you. And
we can go on and on about all of these things because we've experienced them and we see, you know, what's needed because those things weren't provided to us. And so now, man, if I would have had this or if I could have had that, you know, I wouldn't be in this situation. Hindsight, you know, 2020. So that's part of what Project Rebound does by centering the leadership of those most impacted. So I can use the wealth of my experiences to help guide someone else so that they don't have to take their tuition, debt to the grave. So, you know, it's what we do. It's all about, you know, paying it forward and giving it back and trying to make it a little better and different for the next generation. And, you know, we can do it. I'm not my mother. My mother wasn't her mother. My kids are not who I am. You know, each generation has the capacity and the ability to do better and to go further and to do more. And we're seeing it happen, you know, so that's why we do what we do.
Romarilyn, I am so grateful for you, your heartbeat, your wealth of knowledge, your passion. I just really appreciate you showing up today on a Sunday and taking time to inspire, you know, us, of course. Well, Yehuda was lucky he had you, but to inspire me, to inspire, you know, everyone who's listening. And yeah, just your bravery, to be honest, of your authenticity of what we really need to do. And as a community to rise up. And I think the most powerful thing that I heard is about women together rising up. And when you were inside and you were with women who were incredibly diverse and that you stuck together and the power of that, you know, what that means. And I feel the same thing. And out here, we can do it. And we've seen it with protests. We've seen policies changing with that connection to a protest. So I just appreciate your fierce voice. And I look forward to continuing this with you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Romarilyn. Until the next time, I'm sure we will speak again. Thank you so much for gracing us and our listeners with your presence.
It's been a pleasure, Yehuda. Shalom.
Shalom.
We'd like to thank our listeners, and special thanks to Arts in Action, part of USC Visions and Voices, the Arts and Humanities Initiative, for their generous support. Arts in Action, part of USC Visions and Voices, plants seeds for positive social change by activating intensive art projects between community partners, students, and faculty. Today's episode is written and produced by Susie Hess and Yehuda Price. Today's music is co-written and produced by Yehuda Price, utilizing a contraband cell phone while in prison. Our Stories Matter is brought to you by Trauma Informed LA. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Our Stories Matter and our website at traumainformedla.org. Please give us 5 stars on iTunes so more folks can have access and donate to traumainformedla.org so we can keep recording and healing through our storytelling episodes.
chains, trying to duck the 12th letter. Life, it's the life we live. Modern day slavery, pursuing cheddar. Life, it's the life we live. Whips and chains, trying to duck the 12th letter.
Mamas tell us be good, obey mass, so don't be like daddy, all in the hood, okay, bass.